Hello there, my name is John Meyer, and I am very excited to share with you the Feathered Flute. I'm even more excited to partner with pianobook on this project. The Feathered Flute is NKS ready, works with the free Kontakt Player, so it does not require the full version of Kontakt. Years ago, I sampled this flute, and I combined it with an old student violin, and I made one of my very first sample instruments called the Flute+Violin. That's the best name that I could come up with. That sound later became Arctic Swells, which is the first pianobook instrument to become a Spitfire LABS instrument, which was easily one of my proudest moments. The Feathered Flute focuses on the sound that comes from this cedar flute carved by my brother-in-law's father, Vernon Agold. I made an entire video about this when it became Arctic Swells, and I'll be sure to link to that in the description so you can go check it out. I knew that after making the flute and violin and seeing the great response from so many of you, that one day I would go back and revisit this flute in a more comprehensive way. Let's take a look at the GUI. Before I get too far, I want to credit Hunter Rogerson for designing this. He did a fantastic job. He is a fellow contributor to pianobook. You'll notice there are 7 articulations on the bottom. I'll explain these more as we go, but we have sustain, staccato, chatter, ethereal, and then a grouping of swells, short, medium, and long. Dynamics, expression, and a low-pass filter, and then we have the feather knob. When turned all the way to the left, you have a very dry sound. All the way to the right, and it's 100% wet. This is my own concoction of reverbs and delays and pitch effects, and I'd tell you more about what I did, but I don't remember exactly. My preference is to start right about in this range. Okay, we'll start with the sustain. The sustain is the most basic patch and it works great with chords. A handful of these articulations have additional controls on the advanced page, and the sustain is one. You'll notice that when you click on it, it lights up on that page. When you click on something else, it goes dim. The flute is this main flute right here. So if you only want to hear that flute, you can turn off the choir sound. In addition to this flute, I have a bunch of other flutes in the other room, and I sampled them. I didn't go as deep with each one of those, but I sampled some and panned them left, and some of the lower range, and the lower octaves, and higher range, and so on, and that's where you get the choir sound. My preference is playing them both together. You also have attack and release controls, fairly straightforward. Let's move on to staccato. Now there is a built-in delay and reverb, and I tried to give you something that wasn't an obvious quarter note or eighth note, just kind of a playful bounce. But you might want to turn the feather off for this. A quick tip, I'll take a plugin like Echo Boy, put it on a simple eighth note. It doesn't have to be a fancy plugin. It sounds like this. But when you bring in the feather, you get... Go even further and add a stereo delay, and we'll put a dotted eighth on one side. That way you get timing that works with your track, but you can also have kind of the chaos going on in the background. All right, chatter, I love this. If you turn the feather knob way up, I sampled a number of flutes with random staccato patterns, so when you put it all together, it's chaos. Now we have Ethereal. This works great with dynamics control and especially the low-pass filter. With the Ethereal, you can only listen to the flute. Which is very similar to the sustain patch. I also sampled a sub bass. And then we have grit. I'll be honest with you here, this might be a failed attempt for me to sample a cello and a violin with my skills to kind of recreate what I did with the flute violin. And it sounds pretty awful, and I almost left it out, but mixed in with the flute and the sub, it can be very nice. All right, let's get to the swells. These are performances, short, medium, and long. They're not to any specific tempo, but I wanted to give you 3 basic options, and you have the ability to key switch between the 3. You might need to move this down an octave to see the key switches, but I can imagine a situation where you might want to go from the short to the mediums to the long. Let's listen to the short swells. You'll hear squeaks at the end. That's part of the sound of this flute, especially played at lower dynamics. It's difficult in super high dynamics, but I think it's part of the charm. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not I need to minimize the squeaks, but I decided it's part of the sound. Now to the medium swells. I think this is my favorite articulation of all. With this patch, you have to let it tell you what to do in a way. You can't force it, you can't go too fast, but I think there's a nice pace to it. And then finally, the long swell. And that's the feathered flute. It's a very specific sound, but I think it's also a very flexible sound, and I can imagine it being used featured and also in the background just to add those cinematic textures that we're always looking for. This has been a huge thrill. Having the support of Pianobook and Spitfire and Christian, it just means the world to me. So I'm going to keep making the best instruments I possibly can, and all of you at Pianobook, I expect you to do the same for me. Talk soon.